Maggot, a horror story told in serial form. Part 2. Spring break 1973. Friday night, later. I had just dropped my butt on the gazebo floor and stomped on it, when Bag put a hand on my arm and said, "Here's our first victim." A figure was crossing the park, not far from our vantage point. "He'll see us," I said, automatically lowering my voice. "Nah," Bag whispered back. "Too dark." But the man, for it was clearly a man, must have sensed something, for he stopped and looked carefully around the park in every direction. With his head tilted in such a way, he looked as if he was actually sniffing the air. He turned towards us briefly, revealing a pair of shining, owlish eyes. And that's when I recognized him. "Why, it's the Ghoulie Man," I whispered. "And who the hell is the Ghoulie Man?" Bag whispered back. The Ghoulie Man was a strange old man who lived in one of the other high-rise buildings near our apartment. He was a short, squat, balding man with a thick accent, one I couldn't place, and gawking, bulging eyes, usually seen wearing a white shirt and black tie under a thick black overcoat. In other words, he was a dead ringer for Uncle Fester in the old Addams Family cartoons. The Ghoulie Man's appearance alone was enough to attract attention in a working-class neighborhood, but it was his public behavior which really singled him out. To describe him as excitable was the understatement of the year. He was seen on the streets night and day, almost as much as Jimbo, and often appeared to be talking to himself. In the local stores, he was notorious for engaging the staff in long, animated monologues in which he asked the most ridiculous questions and made petty and bogus complaints. And he also wanted to find a woman. "That's the guy who asked the old doll to marry him." "What?" Bag was so surprised he spoke aloud. "Shh," I said. "He asked the old doll to marry him. He asked all the women up in the apartment building to marry him. The old doll said no. I wonder what he's doing here." The Ghoulie Man had quit inhaling and looking around, and, satisfied he was alone, continued walking in the direction of the road leading down to the pier. "Well," Bag whispered. "Okay," I said quietly. "Let's follow him." In truth, I was curious to see where he was going on such a wild night. "All right, but since he knows you, you walk along Front Street until you come to the edge of the park, but don't go down to the pier. I'll edge over to the bushes and see if I can make visual contact." "Visual contact?" I said, arching an eyebrow. "All right, then, see him. See what he's up to." "What if he decides to turn around and come back? I don't want him walking into me." "If you see him coming, head back down front, and if that don't work, turn around and hightail it up to King and veer right and come back around the block. We'll rendezvous at the gazebo. Now quit arguing with me and let's go." I watched as Bag slipped into the shadows, heading for the bushes along the wire fencing, which overlooked the lake and Pier 1. I snuck around the back of the pavilion and hurried onto front, where, hands thrust into trench coat pockets, I began to saunter along, just a guy out for a stroll along the deserted streets in the middle of a tempestuous midwinter storm. In other words, I stood out like a sore thumb. A sore thumb. As I moved forward, I tried to find Bag moving through the darkness. It was difficult to pick him up at first, despite his loud yellow winter coat. But when I finally made him, I was startled to see he was frantically signaling to me to come quick. I ran across the park, not worrying about noise, which would have been covered up by the clamorous sound of the crashing waves anyways. I was out of breath. Too much smoking. By the time I got up to him, but I still managed to gasp. "What's up?" "Noise much?" he griped. "Never mind," I wheezed. Standing along the fencing, the cacophony of the waves was even more pronounced, and there was no longer any reason for whispering. "Where is he?" I said aloud, voice muted by the wind. Bag's answer was to point down towards the spot where the road met the end of the pier. I could see the ghoulie man standing there, looking out at the lake and the tempest. The waters of the lake were a satanic black, except for the almost phosphorescent froth of the whitecaps, churned up by the demonic night winds. As they crashed against the stony shoreline, the waves were probably running 5 or 6 feet high. The end of the pier was obliterated by the rampaging storm, as breaker after breaker rolled across it. The white lighthouse at the very end was gone from sight. And, as we watched, the ghoulie man took a step forward onto the very edge of the pier. I put my mouth close to one of Bag's cauliflower ears so he could hear me above the uproar. "Where is he going?" "Maybe he wants a better look at the storm," Bag yelled towards me. "He couldn't see it from where he was?" Bag's answer this time was a shrug. Not that I would have been listening to anything he said, as I was too busy watching the ghoulie man step out onto the pier, drawing even closer to the thundering billows. "What's he doing?" I yelled at my companion. "He's going to be killed." And at that point, Uncle Fester stepped directly into the path of a wave and was struck by a wall of water. We watched in horror as he was pummeled by whitecap after whitecap, but somehow not only managed to stay on his feet, but to actually move forward, as if he was planning to take an evening stroll out on the pier. I realized he was in imminent danger of being swept away and drowning when I heard Bag gasp and point. What I saw sent a spasm of fear shooting through my entire being. Out across the dark waters, a monstrous rogue wave, a Great Lakes tsunami, the crest of its white caps like an enormous line of white cliffs, was dashing towards shore with tremendous velocity. So high were the billows, we both forgot about the peril of Uncle Fester and took to our heels, convinced the rogue would inundate the entire park and drag us to our deaths. We had managed to get a block away from the shore when it hit with a that obliterated all other sounds and knocked us off our feet, the very ground convulsing as if we were experiencing the shock of an earthquake. We lay sprawled across the frigid sidewalk, too stunned to move, perhaps not really sure that we were alive, that we had somehow managed to survive. Slowly we pulled ourselves up to our knees, then to our feet. "Shall we go look?" Bag said quietly. "No way he could have possibly survived," I said. "Well, let's go back and look at the damage, then." We turned around and shuffled our way down Navy Street towards the park. I suppose we must have been in shock, as we did not immediately notice the profound silence. About halfway, Bag suddenly grabbed my arm and said, "I can't hear the lake." The clamor of the waves striking the shore, coupled with the wailing of the banshee winds, had reduced earlier conversation to shouting. But now everything was quiet, dead quiet. I might have thought we were deaf, were it not for the fact the air currents had completely died down. All was still, and all was bright. The heavy, low-scudding clouds which had raced across the sky had vanished, and the stars were visible in the heavens. On reaching the park, we found no sign of damage. "I've heard they put LSD in their donuts," Bag said ruefully. This doesn't make any sense," I said angrily. "We couldn't have imagined something like that. And what about the weather, eh? Are we imagining that? It's totally changed in the last few minutes." I was so impassioned, I was probably spraying the entire park with spittle. "I'm not arguing with you," Bag said. "The weather has completely changed. It was cold and windy earlier, and now it's almost pleasant." "What about Ghoulie?" I said, slapping my forehead. "Did we imagine him too?" "Nope, because there he is now." We had reached the fence. I looked down at the pier, and there was the ghoulie man at the halfway point, walking back towards the park, as if he had taken a leisurely summer promenade out to the lighthouse and was now returning. "I think we better get out of here," I said, shrinking back from our vantage point. I didn't want this man to see me, and I didn't want him to know we had been spying on him. I had to fight the urge to flee, and I was only successful because Bag's presence steadied me. "Let's go back to the gazebo and watch what happens," Bag suggested. "No, I think we should get the hell out now." The point of the matter was I was scared. I didn't understand what I had seen, and it frightened me to the point I just wanted to go home and hide in the bedroom. "Well, we've got to move now if we want to stay hidden," Bag said, turning around and slipping back into the nearest shadows. I took one last look, saw Uncle Fester had almost reached the end of the dock, and turned to join him under cover. I followed him back to the pavilion, where he said, lowering his voice, "I think we should stay here for now and let him pass, rather than risk him seeing us walking away. It's quite dark under here, so he isn't going to see us unless he walks right up to us. So just keep quiet, and whatever you do, don't light up." The last command was hard, for I was so shook up, I was literally dying for a smoke. We waited in total silence, staring across the park. After a minute or two, the ghoulie man appeared, walking along Navy Street, but, much to our relief, not actually entering the park. It was hard to tell, given the distance involved, but his clothing did not appear to be wet. He had no sooner come into view, however, when he was pinioned by the headlights of an approaching vehicle. As we watched, the automobile appeared, a long, black 1950s Buick. When the car had drawn to a stop, the ghoulie man approached the driver's side and appeared to speak to whoever was sitting in the driver's seat. We strained our ears to listen, but they were too far away. After about a minute, Uncle Fester walked around to the rear of the car and got in at the passenger side. Bag suddenly grabbed my arm and yanked me back towards the rear of the gazebo. "Quick," he hissed. "Kneel down on the back steps with your head down. Now!" He pulled me down on the wooden steps before I could raise any objection. But no sooner were we in position when the headlights of the car illuminated the interior of the pavilion, lighting up the picnic table where we had been seated just moments before. "Keep your head down," he rasped. We stayed frozen for an entire minute, while the car remained stationary, flooding the gazebo with the glare of its headlamps. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, it began to move, but instead of driving away, it turned very slowly, sweeping the entire park with its beams before driving off down Front Street at a leisurely pace. Bag sprang up and slipped over to the street, looking to see where they had gone. He was back almost instantaneously, gasping, "They've turned up Thomas. I bet they're going around the block. Come on, in the bushes and down." And then they were back, sweeping the park and the gazebo once again with their lights, as if determined to find anyone who might be lurking in the shadows. I got down as low as I could, grateful the earth on which I was sprawled was reasonably dry. After 2 or 3 minutes, we heard the vehicle drive off. It had an old-fashioned 8-cylinder engine, which was both loud and distinctive. Bag scampered off again, and when he returned said, "They went all the way down to Trafalgar and turned up. I think they may be gone." "How the hell did they know we were here?" I said, the tension of the last few minutes hardening my tone. "Maybe they didn't. Maybe they were just being careful." "What the hell are they up to?" "I don't know." Bag was stressed too. "Since you're asking questions, why not ask me how he could have walked out on that pier and not drowned? Or ask me what happened to the storm. I don't know the answer to that either." "I told you we should have gone to T.O. It's too late for that now." "What do you mean too late?" "I think they knew we were here." I thought so too, although I was loath to admit it. Hell, I was frightened to admit it. What I actually said was, "So what are we going to do now?" "Let's start by getting the hell out of here." To be continued.